Hi everyone, my name is Vara. I am HR professional who's passionate about connecting with HR experts. Today, our topic is going to be change management, talking about how fast the world is changing. We as an organizations have to constantly move fast to keep up with the change. Be it be a new technology or new ways of working or change in business priorities. Change has become normal. Mona and I had so many awesome conversations. Just to give a little bit introduction about Mona, Mona is a psychology of change expert. She has been working in organization development for almost 20 years, helping organizations not just manage change, but also helping facilitate learning experiences for teams and leaders to not just experience change but also lead the change effectively. So it's she is a person with awesome change management knowledge, and today I'm super excited to have her and talk about a lot of real life challenges we as an HR professionals face with change and how can we make it as smooth as possible for our teams. Thank you so much, Mona, for joining this podcast with me. Super duper excited to have you.
Thanks, Vara. I'm so excited to be here and talk all things change. And I've worked with so many HR people and in HR, so this is a really topic close to my heart as well. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Just diving into it. You mentioned about working with HR professionals, and oftentimes I've seen us facing a lot of frustrations because we know that this change is going to be really good for the teams. We go get the managers buy-in. We do a lot of meetings. We do a lot of trainings. But in the end, we see people not adopting the change properly. Why do you think the cause for this is?
It's really dependent on the nature of the change. So if you've already engaged with managers a lot and they've said, yes, this looks amazing, but then when the time comes, then they suddenly disappear. um, then maybe one possible reason is actually capacity, like not having the actual physical time or people to help implement the change. So that's just a very practical operational consideration. And depending on your business, you might have different areas of the business who have seasonal requirements. So, like finance teams in the end of financial year will be extremely busy. So if you're going live with a system when they're extremely busy, it might not work well for them. So they might disengage, as an example. But also, it might be that they haven't quite understood that they need to change their processes in order to implement the new system. So one organization, everyone was super keen to have this new system come in. And then when it actually came in and they realized, oh, we have to change, for example, the way we recruit people to use this system. And that was never clearly articulated, or, they didn't actually go through a pilot or like a walkthrough, a real life walkthrough of then you'll do this and then all the steps involve the procedures. So the reality was very different to what was actually proposed or discussed initially. So yeah, there's things that happen quite a lot. There's so much to say in this space. Another thing is just having situational awareness. So they talk about situational awareness in first responder type industries where we've always got to be aware of our environment. Our environment changes. And I like to use it within the change and teams context because you might have, HR teams may have talked to someone 3 months ago and then they're like, yes, we'll go live in 3 months. Everyone says, yep, that's amazing, works well. And then there's a gap, 3 months goes by, nobody talks to each other, HR does their thing, and then you go live, and suddenly the landscape has changed for a particular team completely. And maybe they've got people suddenly on leave, maybe they've had a change in their environment, something else, their executive has said something else is now a priority, So having that situational awareness, or we say, responsiveness to change, and it's really being aware, has our environment changed? Do we still do things the way we initially wanted to do it? Or, there's also agile, being, working agile and iteratively. So there's all the three terms that we could use for the almost the same thing.
Wow. I really like when you said it's about knowing how the change will look like practically for every department. I think that's the biggest gap, like practically walk through, okay, how does it going to impact your processes and looking into each and everything. And it's just almost like a technology. Like people, before we build the whole technology, there's a prototype to see, is it exactly working like we wanted it to work?
Exactly.
So love that. And also the point when you mentioned if it's too much gap between when it's proposed a change and it's making change, as I mentioned earlier, how the world is changing so fast, we're changing so fast, and implementing it even after 3 months could be different for the teams.
Absolutely. And it's also, if a business doesn't have a proven way of implementing change, then nobody knows what to expect when change is rolled out. Each time a change is rolled out, it's done differently. And so there's no rhythm. There's no rhythm for that process of change. So even if the change is different, our approach to change can be the same. So, it might be we communicate with you fortnightly until it's implemented, or we always do a pilot to walk through step by step. And that rhythm of change actually helps smooth out those adoption issues as well.
Wow, you already pointed out a few red flags to look for, like things have been changed with time. You have to keep checking back again with the stakeholders. Does this still make sense to you? Just like that, what are the other red flags or signs do you think we should keep in mind to make sure change is still on track, um, and that we can successfully implement it?
Sure. So the first thing I'd start with anyone, not just HR teams, anyone rolling out a change, even if it's a small team change, to have a really simple, depending on the change, if it's a small change, have a simple analysis up front. So if I walk into a change that I'm supporting and I haven't seen an upfront analysis done, for example, what is the current state? What's the future state? And what's the gap? What is the actual change? If I don't see that documented anywhere and they're already through implementation, for me, that's a huge red flag. So that, and what that will do is it'll actually step out those things that we said in the first question, which is what will it actually look like in real life for that area of the business? And when we even at a really a high level statement that, for example, if we use the same example, the recruitment, the steps to recruit someone will have to change. So, when you do a process manually compared to when we do it in a system, there's different delegations, there's different approval processes it has to go through, and things get emailed to someone to approve versus walking to someone's desk and getting a signature. So if those things aren't documented, that's a huge red flag for me. And I'll use the analogy of, if we're building a bridge, and we say we want to build a bridge to get from this side to that side, and we're just going to start building the bridge. And we haven't done any analysis of how many people will use this bridge. What kind of will cars use this bridge? Is there going to be a train on this bridge? Is there going to be a truck on this bridge? Is there water under the bridge? Do boats need to be able to go under the bridge? We don't do any of that analysis, and we just build some random bridge. And then after we've built it, a car goes past, it can't fit on the bridge, a boat needs to go under it, it can't, it's too high. There's just basic, you could even apply those engineering construction principles that if we don't do the analysis up front in when we implement change, how do we know what we're building? How do we know if what we're building, if what we're changing is suitable for the actual environment that we're doing that analysis? What will it look like now? What will it look like in the future? And what is that change? So that's the biggest red flag for me. And it sounds super simple, but it's often that vision, and that gap is not there.
having that whole document written down, it's not just for us to know how step by step look like and what change effectively we need to implement, but also for managers and team leads to know what to expect in terms of change. Okay, this is like, if firsthand I know, okay, these are the changes that are going to happen within my department in each processes, and this is how it's look like in detail.
Yeah. Absolutely. And documenting it, while it sounds like quite laborious, what it does is those things that we document, we can repurpose it. So we can use that for key messaging. So if we capture the current future state and then what is the change, when we communicate to those departments, we've already written down what we need to communicate to them. So it's just copy and paste, real little bit of refinement. And you would have those departments involved in that discussion of what is the current and what is the future. And then what does that mean for you? But there's a lot of things that can be repurposed throughout the change. So we can be efficient with it. Some of the other red flags, just overall, is when there aren't clear success indicators to start with. When somebody, a leader, or even if in HR, you can't clearly articulate what success looks like beyond this gets done. So how are people working? What are people saying? Those kind of really get into the detail. But also once you've started implementing, let's say you've also done that, if there's a lack of engagement, so we all know that's a red flag, right? If
Yeah.
people are coming to your workshops, nobody's communicating anything, everybody's silent, that's the worst. I would rather have people come and complain about it in the workshop, or ask me questions, or say, we don't think it'll work because XYZ. That tells me they've taken the time to think it through. They feel safe enough to communicate and be heard. They know that we'll take action on what they say. And then we have to follow through, obviously. But a lot of leaders find that as a red flag, people communicating that they don't think it'll work. But I see that as a green flag. So people voicing their concerns is in front of the people implementing, not gossiping, but in front of the people in those sessions. That's a huge green flag for me. And then the last green flag, and this has been researched as well, that if there's no clear sponsorship, so if there's no executive or decision maker or someone who can actually enable the change team, there's no visible sponsorship backing and endorsing this beyond just sending an email saying we've gone live, do it, which that's what some places do. But really getting involved, meeting with people who are impacted, really endorsing why they believe in the change. This is actually the number one cause of failure for change, especially culture change. Anything that involves a change of behavior, change of culture, you really need that executive backing. If you don't have that up front, get that before doing anything. So that's another huge red flag as well.
Wow. I really love what you said about the lack of engagement. Usually, when everybody started voicing out their opinion, saying, "Oh no, this is not going to work for us. Maybe implement for other departments, or maybe not for anyone else." Um, HR people often feel demotivated. They're like, "Okay, we're doing a lot of work for you, and not even like helping us support this change." But kind of shifting that mindset and thinking like, okay, there is a concern there, that's something that we need to address. In the end, it's about making a change that is effective for the business. We don't want to keep making change or taking initiatives just for the sake of doing something. So I really love how there's a change in mindset and how we see that as a green flag more. And talking about understanding what is required by stakeholders, we'd love to know, when you talk about executives and getting their buy-in and being like that person who kind of advocate for our change, how do we know what is important for stakeholders in terms of priorities, so we can whatever the message that we share, or while we're building the whole system for them, we know that we get the maximum buy-in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the sponsor, if you're looking for a sponsor, and again, it depends on the organization. Some businesses already have a structure in place that says, for example, if you're implementing a HR system, the sponsor has to be the HR executive. or if there's no HR executive, if it's a smaller business, it has to be the CEO. So if you've already got that in place, that's fine. But I would also look at someone, if you're finding someone to advocate, is someone who has authority in that area, someone who maybe is already passionate about it, and someone who people would listen to if they were to speak on that topic. But then actually approaching them or other stakeholders that we think are relevant to this change or this initiative we want to roll out is I meet with them very early and I actually find out what they would like to get out of the change, how they'd like to get involved. This tells me straight away how interested they are in the change and what stake they have. And it's, I guess it's more first listening rather than telling. And there's this concept in a lot of counseling or just effective listening is meeting people where they're at. And I think when we roll out change, that's what we really have to do, is rather than push our agenda first, is okay, this is a change we've decided we think is good for the business. This is why we think it's good, but we want to hear from you. Do you think this is a good idea? What would you like to see happen to solve this problem? Because at the end of the day, we're rolling out a change to solve a particular problem or tap into an opportunity. And that should always be our end goal, is that, not that specific change itself. Because again, our environment changes. We need to it keeps us on our feet, that's for sure. To figure that out. And this takes a human design and people centric approach. So in a lot of innovation, this is how they approach stakeholders, is actually diverging. So meeting with the stakeholder, having brainstorming, having any kind of thoughts that come up, consideration, perspectives, and then diverging into potential solutions, and then going back out again and diverging. So there's this in and out of brainstorming, coming to options, going back to stakeholders, and that's the human design principles. It's also appreciative inquiry, if anyone's heard of that, which is strengths based approaches to transformation and culture change, but elements of it can be used within just regular implementing a system as well. And all of them involve getting the stakeholders involved right from the start. So, and not telling them, but engaging them the whole way. And people have said, that's going to take too long. We don't want to consult. We just want to get it done. So then they implement a system. 6 months later, no one is really engaged in the system. That 6 months could have been 3 months of it could have been used to consult and prepare to implement and really get people to have buy-in and ownership and really hands-on involvement. So when we consult and we know what's important to stakeholders and stakeholders know that they're being listened to, they take ownership of the change. That's one of the biggest, I guess, things that we try to do as change practitioners, is to create that ownership early, because that means even if we have sticky situations during implementation, those stakeholders are like, yep, I get why this has happened. I'm going to come in and help out, instead of, see, I told you that wasn't going to work, and then hands off.
I love what you said. I've often seen in organizations doing retreats or having this organizations meetups where they often focus on brainstorming sessions, giving them the big charts and making them involved in strategic direction of the organization. And it was so good because everybody, like you mentioned, has shared their opinion or being part of the plan, and then create the whole plan. It's not the leaders who are creating, it's all the people who are involved. Moving ahead, I have a question about building resilience in teams. I've gone through a lot of your blogs where you talk about building resilience in teams is how much important. So whatever change is happening in the organization, teams are ready for that change. Um, and my question here is, would love to know any trainings or initiatives that we as an HR can start doing it to build that capacity within teams.
I love that question. Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is that building resilience, the world goes through, or organizations go through phases. And we went through a phase where resilience was made to be solely the responsibility of the individual. Oh, you have to be resilient to this and you have to be resilient to that. But you're right, there's so many initiatives that an organization can do. And one of them is an individual taking accountability for their own resilience. So an organization having support available, but also it's not just the responsibility of that individual to have change resilience for the workplace. So leaders need to also understand the environment to create that enables higher levels of resilience. And then also decision makers or people who are setting up the policies for an organization and governance, decision making, to enable practices that actually enable resilience. So one example at an organizational level is, how many changes do we want that impact stakeholders in the 1 month? Are we going to have
Mhm.
basic project management practices that say you cannot have one team of 5 impacted by 20 different changes in the 1 week? Because how, if they're also highly impacted, for example, it usually means they need to change aspects of their job. They need to do their usual job, their usual full-time job, in addition to changing the ways of working. So let's say they're implementing a new HR system. Let's say finance says, you know what, we're going to roll out a new invoicing system as well, and that's going to impact them in the same week. They're going to have to attend training for that. They're going to have to start using the new invoices. They're going to have to start recruiting using the new HR platform, and they have to train for that. And let's add in another one. Let's say fleet management. So let's say they use cars, business cars for work, and there's a new app to manage their booking of those cars, and they have to learn that as well in the same week. And on top of that,
Wow.
let's add an accommodation.
Oh my God.
We get overwhelmed just thinking about it, right? But this, I've seen this happen, and nobody looks at it overall to say, hang on a second, that team is having to do all of these things in the 1 week or in the 1 month. That's a lot, right? And then what happens is that team might, instead of saying we don't have capacity to actually do this, they might have gotten so overwhelmed that they start saying no to things without providing a reason, and then it makes them sound resistant to change. And so then the conversation all of a sudden can shift to, do we want these people in our organization because they're resisting all these changes? So and that doesn't always happen, but a lot of times it does happen because we haven't really delved into, what is the environment for that team? What are we actually imposing upon them? Is that humanly possible to do all of that? It's their full-time job. So sometimes it's really logical, practical things, and having that enterprise view. So that's one way as an organization at a systemic level they can create change resilience, is actually to monetize the impact of change at a business level. And then at a leadership level, so they, you'd want training on how to just prioritizing decision making. I know they're regular leadership skills, but they're especially important during change, because again, let's say a manager gets told that they have to implement those 5 changes in their team. That manager needs to be able to prioritize really quickly and make a decision really quickly. So they need those skills, and to also communication skills of communicating back up to leadership of, that's not going to work for my team. So and reinforcing the vision. So let's say it practically it would work. They need to have those skills. Optimism, that's a soft
Yeah.
skill, but that is so important during change. And it doesn't have to be blind optimism. It doesn't have to be everything's going to work. We can just sit here and it's all going to be fine. It's all going to, it doesn't have to be blind optimism, but it's an optimism that, you know what, we will figure it out together. Bring your questions to me, bring your concerns. I'll take it up to leadership. I'll follow up. that kind of action taking optimism, because when we have optimism, we often do take actions. We're more, it's been, the research says if we have that optimism, we're more likely to take action. If we don't have optimism, we feel less empowered. And that's where that learned helplessness can come in, where I've seen groups of people just not take action. I'm not going to do anything because nothing I do makes a difference anyway. And that's a horrible place, culturally, to let people. And it's really, it doesn't build resilience to create that kind of environment. And then for individuals, so we've covered organizations, leaders. For individuals, also that optimism, and also how do I, that control versus influence. What's in my control, what's in my influence. So a bit of that growth mindset, skill set, empathy also for leaders, but also training on the actual process. When we implement change, here is the process that we have in place, and training on that. So what are the communication channels, the formal communication channels we use, or if it's a major change that involves layoffs or job changes, maybe there's interview skills training, like just things really practical. So a lot of time to build change resilience, organizations wait until they're in the middle of the storm. So all those 5 changes we went through, let's add a structure change and layoffs to that. And then they're 3 months into it and they realize, oh, people are taking sick leave, our KPIs have gone down, our productivity's gone down. Let's run resilience workshops for everyone. It's too late. That at that point it's too late. You're in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
People are panicked, people are freaking out, people are stressed, people are overwhelmed. It's not a good time to take on new skills. It's not a good time to focus. It can be really difficult, and in that moment they bring in employee assistance providers, so people can book psychologists or counseling, but there's so much an organization can do before that point. EAP is amazing. Resilience workshops are amazing. It's just the timing of them. And it's also layering it with those other support mechanisms. So building the skills, adding it to professional development sessions annual, like all year round, incorporating change resilience into regular leadership development, and then actually applying it in practice. So in one organization I worked with, we knew that there was going to be major restructures. And 6 months before it, we started with change leadership, like it included resilience for individuals, for leaders, for organizations, how to have conversations, mindfulness sessions, but also what emotions we go through during change. And it's really interesting when we had those sessions, maybe 50% of people were like, we don't think we'll ever need this skill. We don't see the need for it. 3 months later, most of those people came to me and said, I am so glad we did this because that situation happened and I knew exactly what to do. And I knew what to expect. And they still came to our team for support, mentoring, but they weren't in such a panic state. They had the knowledge, they knew where to go. And even that is enough to start building change resilience. And imagine if an organization does that, every 2 years they make sure everyone is upskilled before major change, or just on an ongoing basis. It's incorporated, it's integrated. You'd be in an amazing place as an organization. If someone is doing that on a regular basis and you have the metrics, I'd love to see it, because that's really an organization that's forward thinking, cares about their people,
Wow.
cares about their outcomes. Yeah.
Love it. Something that you talked about, which I found very intriguing, is emotions, capturing the emotions of people during the change. So you mentioned about an example where 6 months after, how the people were like bombarded with a lot of things, and there's so much emotions going on. They're going on sick leaves, and so how do we effectively? This is one of the red flag I also see, like how we can like keep an eye out for. So how do you, as a change management expert, you capture those emotions if you have drawn into middle of a restructuring or a layoff or a merger?
Yep. Yep. So one thing, and there's one example I have, is I worked on a team where there was a whole department or a whole function who was displaying behaviors of not wanting to participate in things, sending a lot of grievances up to their senior leaders, and the senior leaders were saying, we don't get it, like it's, they just need to come, it was part of a merger, they just need to come work effectively, and they're being really resistant and all of this. And I said, let's set up a workshop with them, and I want to actually understand how the change has impacted them. I don't want to say anything
Mhm.
else. I just want to hear from them. That's a waste of time. Like, we already know it's not a big deal, da da da. That's okay. I'm just going to run this workshop. All right, we did it. They brought up so many things that impacted them. And some of them were angry because they said 3 months before the change, we kept telling leadership that this is what's going to happen, that we need this support, we need this, we need that. They weren't listened to. So they were angry. By the time they came into that workshop, they were angry. But when you work with those emotions, it's really important not to take those emotions personally. So that's the first thing. And also, I've got like an ebook on this with anger itself. So a lot of people can be scared of anger, myself included, because there's various degrees, right? And we always want to protect our own safety. If someone is really behaving violently or aggressively in the workplace, then of course that's one strategy. You may have workplace policies to address that. But if it's simply verbal and it's not personal, it's not abusive, it's just simply, I am angry that this didn't happen for XYZ, then we listen. It's really important.
Right.
And, I keep bringing up listening to people and letting them have their say, but that helps emotions a lot. It helps us actually get to the truth in change, and that curiosity. You may have even said it before, but curiosity is an amazing characteristic to have during change, during in really anyone. I think curiosity is a life changer, a game changer to have, and listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when those emotions come up, and there are various models that go through what emotions we might see. And, when we think of an iceberg, most people know the iceberg model. It's like, okay, I'm seeing anger on the top, on the surface. That's the behavior. That's the emotion I'm seeing. The behavior I'm seeing is yelling, or, fists clenched. But what's underneath it? What's driving it? What's underneath the iceberg? And that's what we want to use our curiosity to find out. A long
Love it.
explanation.
Yeah, no, that is really good. And one other thing that I noticed is important, as you talked about a lot of good characteristics that people needs to have for change. Resilience is also trust, I
Mm,
think, in leadership. And, if I have trust that, okay, everything is going to be okay, because I think it's a lot of fear when people hear about change, or what's going to happen to my position, what's going to happen to my role, am I going to keep up with the change, or am I going to be set back,
yeah,
uh, there's so many thoughts that happens. And if a leadership give me assurance that it's all going to be okay, I'm going to be with you in this process, I'm going to do this, that's kind of what I gained from you through all this explanation, is that that is also one of the important thing
100%,
to manage.
100%. And the
Yeah.
culture of an organization and the level of trust that exists before a change will actually influence the speed that people can take on a change. So yeah,
Yeah.
you've spot on, Vara. You picked it up exactly. It's if there's low trust and the culture, there's a lack of engagement. Yeah, guess what? When there's a change, you're going to experience exactly the same. When there's high trust and high engagement to begin with, and the change is managed well, people are going to, the benefit of the doubt. The leaders will get the benefit of the doubt. So I worked with a leader who, we had a restructure. I was impacted by the restructure. My whole team was. We already had trust in our leader. And this person said, whenever I find out information, I will share it with you. At the moment, this is all I know. So that's what I'm sharing with you. And actually, that leader was also impacted by the restructure. So that's, that's amazing and very admirable. A leader is impacted. They're still optimistic. They're still supportive, even when they know they might not have a role at the end of the day. And the whole way through, this leader followed through, got our questions answered, And most people were okay. There was a few people that knew they would potentially lose their job, and they were looked after even more. But as I spoke to those people, all of them had high regard for this leader because of the way they treated. So yeah,
Manager.
because they
Yeah.
managed it, they supported them to get new roles. They used their networks. Yeah, it's really how we do things, and the outcome. Maybe we don't want the outcome, we want to stay within our organization, but the how we manage a change is almost more important as what the change is. A lot of time when people are upset at a change, it's the how it was managed rather than the outcome of the change.
Wow. And talking about restructuring that particular example, if there are oftentimes I've seen when managers do not transparently share the information with the team, because it's still unsure if the layoffs are going to happen, if you know, but they don't want to share it with the team because they don't want to freak out the team and or affect the operations. But how do you think it's optimistic to keep transparent communication with the team, how things are going on, or how do we manage the communication effectively in this scenario when we're not sure if the role is going to be there or not? Should we say it earlier or should we say when it's happened? It's kind of curious.
Yeah. So that is a challenging situation, and it's very contextual. So for example, if the business is looking at the way it operates, so its operating model, I think it can be transparent about that. It's because that doesn't necessarily lead to job losses. It's just we might all function a little bit differently. And I think they can be transparent that, we're doing an analysis. We think we can be more efficient in these areas. And at that point, they can say, at the moment, we're not looking at anyone's job. We're just looking at a business, how we operate. And then as they get into the analysis and they think, you know what, we probably are going to need to remove 25 positions, but we don't know which positions, but it's going to be 25 positions. At that point, I'd bring in the managers of those positions to consult.
Mm.
And then as it gets more refined, and at that point, I'd probably say, there's certain functions we're looking at, and it's really important. If they think they're starting to look at those functions and it's going to take a year to decide, I wouldn't say there's going to be job losses, because then those people for a whole year are going to experience that anxiety and maybe move on as well. And there's still no certainty that position, that those, they might change their mind and keep all of those positions. So I think there's still integrity in not communicating. And I always go back to values, like, is there integrity? Are we treating people with dignity? Are we taking care of their well-being, as well as looking at the business outcomes? So because not communicating when we should have communicated impacts our culture. If those people leave, the people left behind will see, okay, the organization could easily do that to me as well. So we're actually impacting the
Yes.
culture. Yeah, so it is a really fine balance, but it's knowing how soon will we have a decision, and if we leave people in limbo for that long, is that an acceptable period? Can we manage their anxiety in that period? What information can we give them? If it's too long to be in limbo, then I would keep it at a higher level. But once a decision has been made and people have been consulted with, I would talk to people who are going to be highly impacted first and get the information to them as soon as possible.
Right. Awesome. On those lines of a practical example, I have a question about Amazon, where
Hot
it's
topic.
a very fun, yeah, a hot topic. So Amazon just announced that they're going back to in office 5 days a week starting next year, and a lot of people on LinkedIn aren't showing any positive reaction to it. I would love to know, like, when changes happen, I always think about how can we make this change exciting? Right, that's kind of a mindset that that I learned from you, that this is how to think and plan ahead. Um, so talking about Amazon, what do you think? Like, how do you think would this change would have managed better to make it more exciting than, because we all love flexibility and
Yeah.
freedom. So
So I guess it
That's
comes down to, with that Amazon example, and there's other businesses, right, that want to move to more working from the office and not remotely, but it's why. Why are they doing it? So personally, we've seen studies on if people work together, there's more likely chances of collaboration or spark of innovation and new ideas. So maybe that's one of the reasons. But there's also some businesses who they believe people do more work if they're in an office and they're being watched. So it's really, and again, this goes back to, is there an effective culture, a healthy culture to begin with at Amazon and trust to begin with? Or does that not exist? Because if that doesn't exist, it's going to be much harder to get people excited about the change. And at the end of the day, what's in it for me? So that's a big one, communicating change. What's in it for me? So people going back to the office for 5 days, if Amazon is only speaking what's in it for Amazon, what's in it for the profits, what's in it for the customers, that's got nothing to do with the employees. Well, it does. If the business is doing well, they're going to have a job, but they need to communicate to the heart of the employee. What's in it for you to come into work 5 days a week? So maybe it's, we're going to do free lunch every day. So come back into work, you're going
Yeah.
to get free lunch, free breakfast, or whatever it is. That's a new condition, for example. Or come into work and you still have flexibility to work from home when you on an as needs basis if you have an appointment or you need to do a school drop off, because that's a big thing. There's a lot of parents who need to do that, or there's just a lot of people who aren't parents who have appointments or other things they need to do during the workday. A lot of banks don't open on the weekend, so if we work Monday to Friday, it's hard if you need to go in person. So there's yeah
Yeah.
there's what is in it for me, and really understanding how this benefits their employees, because it does need to benefit employees on some level. If it doesn't, then it's just going to be a job for people, and then if the conditions no longer benefit people, no longer align to their values, they're going to see people leaving. And I don't know Amazon, but I've read things like this is like a redundancy in disguise, getting rid of some people. So and again, that's there's lots of ways that we could look at it, or maybe it's a control thing where they have to see people working to know that there's actually work being done. But that's a leadership and management issue, right? So when we work
Yes.
remotely, when I work on projects, I've got very clear deliverables, outputs. If I don't get those done, whether I'm in the office or not, I have a discussion with my with my leadership team. So, then there's that whole working in agile frameworks where it's output based and not site. You actually see people. But if they want more, if the reason is more collaboration, there's other ways to increase collaboration. There's 100% remote companies who innovate and who collaborate really well. So it's learning from people who do it really well as well. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I'd be interested to see all the leadership reasons of why they're going to that, and really how they're communicating to their people, to the heart of their people. How have we thought about your needs when we came to this decision?
Yes.
And that would get people
Yeah.
excited if they knew their needs were also considered.
Wow. I love this when you said what's in it for me
Mm,
is something that using not just for like change and going back to the office or also all kinds of
yeah.
changes, looking into managers or, you know, and then we as HR strategically planning things to communicate in a way that shows the benefit clearly to the manager so we get more
Yes.
buy-in from them. So I love that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. And honestly, yeah, if Amazon announces um, free food, we don't have to cook at
yeah.
home. And if they announce like, oh, they're going to be TED Talks and all kinds of learning that you can do that we're going to begin with, things like that, if they communicate like you mentioned, I would be super excited. I know that I will get more value going to the office, so I would go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's what's in it for me. Like how is this going to impact my life? Have they even considered me? And like ideally, if I was them, and maybe they did this, I'm not sure, but I would propose that we want to make this change. We're going to go through 1 month of consultation. We'll get your feedback. What do you think? What do you all those things, and then they make a decision based on that, so that they've got people's input. And the other thing is looking at the adoption curve. So the innovation of adoption, diffusion of innovation curve. It shows, and probably a lot of you have heard of this, where you get the early adopters. So there might be people at Amazon who are like, yes, I can totally see the benefit of 5 days a week in the office. I don't need anyone to communicate the benefit to me. I get it. I totally understand. And maybe they're people who have been in conversations with leadership, who they understand the story behind it. And then the next phase, the early minority who see the adopters and they're like, oh, they've gone back into the office, they've done all right. I think I can give this a go. And then the early majority. So it's that bell curve that you see. And then you've got the really late adopters. They need to see all the evidence of how this has worked to actually take it on. And they're the last ones to join on. And with this decision, it's such a big difference to the way people are working. They might get people who just don't align to it, who will want to leave Amazon. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And about the timeline, as we talk about it, like the graph, there's always some certain time involved in it to make sure all the people are adopted the change. So my question is, what is the idealistic timeline should we keep in mind for any change? Obviously, every change is different. And how can we shorten it? A person who is not very known into change management might have a longer time versus if we know specific strategies, we can shorten it and make it more effective. Would love to know your thoughts on those things.
Sure. So the things that I would consider when suggesting a timeline is look at all the practical things. So for example, if we're rolling out a HR system, is how much time do we actually have to set up the new system? Do we have a full-time person available to help the vendor? It's usually working with a vendor to implement a new system. Or does someone in HR have to do their regular job plus now this project on the side? So just something like simple like that. The people implementing the change, how much time do they have on their hands to implement? That could, if they have an hour a week to help with
Hmm.
implementation, then that's going
That's
to
like
be
a
a really
longer.
long timeline. So
Yeah.
that's a really practical way to figure it out. The other thing is looking at the business. So does the business have seasonal requirements? So for example, if you're wanting to launch in June, and the finance teams, again, I'll use that example, they're going through their end of financial year, all the things that they have to do. Uh, and then you might have to push it out a month for that team, for example. So it's looking at the operational needs of the business and the stakeholders that need to take it on. What's their capacity? And this is a bit of project management and change management, but sometimes if it's a traditional project, it'll say, no, regardless of people's availability, we're going to run it for 3 months and it's going to be done in 3 months and that's it. So that's where the change element comes in to say, well, actually, people don't have capacity to do it in that time frame. So that's what I think. And then also, I'd have a think about cognitively, so mentally, how much headspace is this change going to take to learn and to
Hmm.
apply. So it's one thing to learn a new system, but it's another thing to actually integrate it into our way of working every day. How long has it, and some ways could be, how long has it taken before? How long has it taken me as a person implementing it to learn this? And then if it's taken me 10 hours to learn this, 20 hours to apply it to my work, so that's 30 hours, and I'm the person involved in it day to day, it might take someone who's not involved in it 2 weeks, like let's say double the time. So it's also looking at that. And with timelines, I'd always suggest a pilot. Take a small group
Hmm.
through the change, and that gives you a really good sense of how long in your business it might take, uh, rather than applying, you know, excuse me, in a larger business, they might say, oh, we rolled that out in a week. maybe they had 50 resources working on it. So in a
Mm.
smaller business, it might not take you a week. You do a pilot. Pilots are amazing. You might think that they add time to the implementation, but they actually save you time because they work through a lot of the creases. They give you an estimation of how long it might take. Yeah, and then with
Wow.
restructures, those I do as quickly as possible. Again, that's because anything that creates ambiguity and anxiety, I would try to put more resources on that to get that done faster. Obviously, enabling time to do things properly, the analysis, the consultation, the legislative requirements, all of that. But minimizing anxiety for people will really help with, productivity at the end of the day and just overall well-being.
Wow. And more as you share about these business requirements and availability of the departments, it makes me think that as an HR, it's extremely important for us to know what each and every department do, what their availability like, what is the whole year looks like. Otherwise, whatever we change, implement, it's not going to be effective. Um, so something else I really loved about what you said in terms of timeline and taking small group of people and experimenting, and at the same time going in phases is something I really loved, where you're not implementing the whole change at once, but kind of giving them step by step, step by step, so it's easy for them to digest and go with it.
Yes, absolutely. So with HR, like HCM systems, I've seen modules rolled out separately or phased in, like you said. So, and I think that works really well. It gives you time to test it. It gives
Wow.
people time to get familiar with the system and also integrate it into their day-to-day work. And it's much better to do something slowly or phase it in than to do it quickly just to get it done and then have negative perceptions of it. Oh, well, that didn't work. That's another thing that didn't work, because we all know negative perceptions are really hard to change. So if they say, oh, everything HR does fails, they do it really quickly and it's just a failure, we'd rather not have that. Do it, phase it in, pilot it, uh, and yeah, and get it done. Do it really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think about those HRs who think like, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna push this change. It's gonna be uncomfortable people for 6 months or an year, but then they get used to it. It's fine. After that, they'll be fine. So, what do you say to the HRs like this?
Yeah, and I've heard there's so many teams that say that, change is disruptive. No matter what we do, it's going to be disruptive. And and managing change through stealth. So it's like whoever can deal with it, whoever's resilient enough will stay, and those who can't deal with it, they can just leave, and they will leave. So that's definitely one attitude to change. Managing change, it's not mine. You've probably realized. um, I, I like to keep a balance between getting the thing done and looking at people's needs. So if we're overly concerned with people who don't want to change, then we may not ever change. So that's not healthy either. But if all we're
Right.
focused on is the task and the goal, and we're not concerned about people, we're going to create a culture where people go, oh, they actually don't even care about us in this culture. And that you
Mm.
will start to create that environment where, if the leadership,
And it's toxic.
yeah, it's toxic, and it continues to get more and more toxic. So it's really knowing every decision we make during change or in a business impacts our culture. And I think decisions are so underrated. It's one of the biggest influences of our culture, of our environment, of psychological safety, but also of our productivity, and that accountability. So without all of that, we don't get effective outcomes. And the way we make our perception of people when we make decisions that impact them can really inform our culture. So yeah, I've worked with a leader who was, well, a few, and I've said, with that approach, you're going to lose knowledge. So if people leave, people in that situation won't care about the business anymore. They might have so much implicit knowledge in their mind, They may have been with the business for 20 years. And when a leader says, I don't care about you, if you can't deal with it, you can just leave. If that's the attitude they have, this person will leave with 20 years of their knowledge, and that could impact the customer base as well. So yeah, don't do that.
Absolutely.
Anyone listening, change can be disruptive, and it is. And I think there are times, especially in an organization who hasn't changed significantly for a long time, but adding that layer of support throughout, and constantly, this is going to be an uncomfortable time, but these are 5 things we're doing to make it more comfortable. Uh, you can always balance it out. There's always a way to create a win-win situation. I'm a big believer in that win-win.
Love it. Yeah. And finally, would love to know all the HR professionals who's watching this podcast, what kind of tools, resources, or frameworks that you recommend them to follow when they're managing any kind of change within their organization, so they can effectively and successfully manage the change for their teams.
That's awesome. There's so many, and it really it really depends on the person in HR, their skill set, but overall, I'd say a high level change analysis and strategy template. So just what we shared earlier, the change analysis, like a change impact assessment, would be what is the current state, what is the future state, and what is the change, and also within that, there's a BTOP framework, we call it. Does this change impact our business, technology, our organization, processes, or people? And again, when we want to make things really clear of what the future state looks like. If we identify which one of those areas it's impacted, that's a really good tool and framework to have. And then the vision. What's the vision and the success markers? So that's your high level statements, or it could be a benefit statement, is that when we implement this, we'll have 50 people in the system. It's going to save us an hour a week doing XYZ. Really clear success markers, and that helps us measure change as well to see if we've been effective. Communication and engagement plans. So, writing a key message. So again, that WIFM, what's in it for me? It's not a framework, but it's a really good slogan to have in mind when we write communication plans. And it might be about create a WIFM for each team that's impacted. So not just one WIFM for the whole organization, but for each team that's impacted differently, we might need to tailor the comms. And then, if you're a larger organization, you could bring in digital solutions. So when we spoke about change resilience, having that overall view of how many changes are happening in the business, you could use Power BI, which is a Microsoft tool, to have the data and then show it up on a dashboard. It's a really good way to show executives and decision makers, look, this is our dashboard on how many changes we have across the business. You could use simple spreadsheets to do that as well. Just depends on the size of your business. If you're implementing a HR system across the business that you think is a little bit complex, there's tools like WalkMe, which integrate with your platform to train people every step of the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it depends on your budget. It depends on how many people you have, all of those things to be considered. And then I'd also say, just overall, an overarching statement is we use a blended methodology. So experienced change practitioners don't stick to one methodology because change isn't linear. So, the project might be managed in an agile way or waterfall way, but within that, we can use, if anyone's familiar with Kotters, Kotter has elements of change that we use. But what I mean with change isn't linear is, for example, a lot of methodologies say you must have change champions. But in some businesses, having separate change champions just doesn't work. Or for some changes, it just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So a lot of times people will have change champions, but it's not part of their job. They're not getting remunerated to do that. So it becomes an extra
Yeah.
task on top of what they're doing. and that's not sustainable. So it doesn't work for every change. So that's where we need to apply that situational awareness and say, does this element of this methodology work in our business? Does it work on this change? And then other things, if you wanted to get more knowledge in change, is the ACMP. So that's the Association of Change Management. Their practices, their standard. So they've got their internationally known global standards on the overall process of managing change. Then you've got human-centered design frameworks, which we
Wow.
covered. Appreciative inquiry, which is that how we ask questions and that process of using strengths based, what's already working well, and then how do we create more of that to bring people along the journey. ADCAR, which I'm busting out a lot of these, and I think you'll put this up on your site.
So many.
um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna
yeah,
drop every
yeah.
link on the podcast.
And then there's understanding the human, the psychology of change. Because one is managing a change overall, the projecty side of change, and then it's having the leadership element, but then it's the human. How are the people in our business responding? And so SCARF, which is a neuroscience-based model, is the drivers behind behaviors. So people who have a high drive for certainty, they're going to get a lot more reactive and responsive when there's uncertainty. That's going to drive certain behaviors. Or people who have a high need for autonomy, and if a particular change removes that autonomy, they're not going to be happy. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, knowing these basic motivation models is, I think I use that in a lot of my work to understand the iceberg. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? But what's underneath? And those the research in psychology, organizational psychology, neuroscience really helps to inform that. And some change frameworks have the project side of change covered, but it doesn't cover those human elements. So it's really important to put those together to effectively manage change.
Wow, that's okay. I'm gonna put all these things links
Yes,
down below. Sounds like very, very, very insightful and a lot of basic principle. Whatever you're sharing is like super fundamental knowledge that everybody needs to know when they're managing change, and I think it will be really helpful for everyone. If you don't mind, I just have one last question that I want to cover.
sure.
It it's about the change management metrics. How
Yes.
do we know we're successfully managing the change? What metrics do you think we should keep in mind or milestones that we can look at?
I love that question as well. Because usually, in HR or any other team, when we're implementing a change, we're doing it because it's going to create a positive environment or it's going to create efficiencies, which is going to save people time.
Yeah.
So it's there's positive intentions behind it. So we want to make sure we do well. So if HR is establishing, let's say, for example, an employee self-service, so you've got your HCM, your HR solution, but now you want employees to be able to jump on and access their own payroll data or submit leave themselves rather than, maybe through email or whatever, a manual process. So one example of metrics is, often I see people saying, well, everybody has a log on and the system's gone live, therefore we've been successful. But that's not true success because technically the system has worked. So from a technical perspective, we've been successful. The system works with other systems. It's switched on. It's on everyone's laptop or phones. Uh, in that sense, it's working. So we're successful, but are people engaging with the system? We also need to measure that. Have we saved the time? So let's say if people are going to access their own pay slips versus HR had to email everyone's payslip before. So let's say that would take HR 20 hours a week to email people's payslip. So one metric will be we're going to save 20 hours a week. So 20 FTE hours are going to be saved in HR to be applied on another project, for example. But if after implementing this, and let's say give a grace period of a month for people to start learning, or even 3 months. After 3 months, HR is actually getting more questions about the system. Nobody wants to get their own pay slips.
I've seen this multiple times
Yeah.
happening with different types of changes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, we can say yes, it's been successful. We've turned it on, but we haven't been successful in saving time. We haven't been successful in enabling people easy access. Sometimes people are at home, they want to plan a travel holiday and they want to just jump into their payroll and see how much leave do I have. They don't want to have to wait. Maybe it's a Friday night. They don't want to wait till Monday to find out from HR how much leave do I have owing to start planning their holiday or to apply for leave. So there's all these benefits, and all of those benefits need to be part of the metrics to then be measured, and put a time in place to actually realize those benefits that we want.
Yeah, and I love that when you talked about communication plan, we're talking about these benefits to them, make them more easy for them to adopt to rather than, if we don't know, okay, the system has changed to that, but I'm more inclined towards HR giving to me. I'm going to more focused on that. That's like a traditional thinking.
Yes,
But if people know there's a benefit that they can access it anytime, they can download the PDF, they don't have to wait for HR and things like that,
exactly.
in part of communication, would help them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's important to highlight those benefits very early on so people start getting excited. Like you said, like, how do we get people excited? It's like, well, you're planning travel on the weekend and you have to wait till the week to talk to someone in HR. Well, now you don't have to wait anymore. So it's really,
Yeah.
it's really getting into their brain and their heart to find out what kind of scenarios might this help them with. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Oh my God, this has been such a pleasure, Mona. There's so many real life examples you've shared and a lot of knowledge, a lot of techniques and strategies you shared in this video, in this podcast, that I'm sure it's going to be super helpful for anyone who's watching. And I will be dropping your website link for people to learn more. There's so many resources that I got a chance to learn from. So feel free to check it out. Mona's work through the website and also all the frameworks that you have shared. We'll have the links down below. Yeah, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining this podcast with me.
Thank you, Vara. I've absolutely loved this conversation, and you just had amazing questions, things that happen a lot. So, asking really good questions is so important during change. So, you've got that down.
Thank you.